Welcome to AutoComplete, the brand new podcast from CNET's Roadshow, all about the latest news in high-tech cars, high-performance cars, and modern driving. Your host will be me, Brian Cooley, and him, Tim Stevens, the editor-in-chief of Roadshow.
How are you, Brian?
Good, and this is kind of fun to launch something new.
Absolutely, launching something new, and each week we're going to give everybody a rundown on what's happened in the week of automotive news, and frankly, there's nowhere better to do that than here on the show floor at the North American International Auto Show.
So easy.
Right.
We're sitting amidst a field of great news stories. So this is an unusual one. We're on location here at the Detroit Auto Show. Let's get right into it, Tim. And of course, most of the stories we've got are about specific cars representing technologies, because so many new models came out here. I want to kick things off with the car that I think is my go-to, and I think it signifies a lot of trends. That's the new Mercedes E-Class, where we've got a car that's signified by three different things. One, an almost completely upholstered LCD dash and center screen. It's almost one screen now.
Right.
They've got advanced self-driving, where it can largely take over the boring basic part of accelerating, braking, and steering up to 80 miles an hour. And third key point on that is the first implementation of car to something, infrastructure or other car,
Right.
communication.
Now, we did see the dual LCD layout in the high-end S-Class, which you and I were testing not that long ago, but there it's visually distincted between two LCDs, one on the left, one on the right. Now they brought them together into a continuous pane of glass.
And one piece of glass over the front does an amazing visual trick to your eyes.
It does, absolutely. It makes it look like, well, I mean, it makes it look absolutely huge, which it is, but it definitely brings everything together. Now they can do a little bit more creative things with graphics and throwing things from one side to the other and things like that. So that's a nice step forward for the S-Class. I do think Mercedes has a little bit of ways to go for integrating things. I like the way that Audi does it with a virtual dashboard, for example, which has got things a little bit more sculpted in there, perhaps.
Yeah, we just gave an award here at the Detroit Auto Show in the first ever Roadshow Shift Awards for the best cabin tech to this rival you're talking about, which is the Audi Virtual Cockpit. Now that's pretty amazing because of the way it morphs.
Right, and it's also using a curved panel, which is very interesting. So it's called using what's called a freeform pane, which is actually curved on the top, so it fits in the dashboard a little bit more nicely. Mercedes-Benz, on the other hand, is using the traditional rectangular-shaped LCDs, as most people do, as in our laptops, for example. But stacking two of those side by side in an extremely wide view, much wider than a movie theater, for example. So you get a nice perspective on what's going on.
Yeah, I don't know what that ratio is. That's like, it's like 54 by 9
something like that. Yeah, absolutely.
It's way out there.
But that's a great technology. But autonomy is definitely one of the more talked about things in the E-Class. Certainly what you and I have been talking about quite a bit this week. Again, this is not an autonomous car. You cannot get in the car and take a nap and expect to wake up at your destination. In fact, if you take a nap, you could wake up somewhere that you don't want to be. But the car will drive itself, as you mentioned, up to 80 miles an hour. But you do need to be alert and awake and have your hands on the wheel most of the time anyway. We were just speaking with the representative from Mercedes-Benz who said that you can take your hands off the wheel for longer periods of time on highways and in controlled situations like that. But ultimately, the car will ask you to put your hands back on the wheel if you are doing it for too long. So if you've been enjoying or cringing at all the videos on YouTube of people driving their Teslas up the highway with their arms crossed or reading books, Mercedes will prompt you to stop doing that and get your hands back on the wheel.
You can still do it, but it's going to be a short YouTube video.
Right.
Only about 30 seconds.
And then the beeping is going to start and the flashing and everything else. But it will ultimately cut down on a lot of the tedium of driving. And ultimately, it's in those tedious situations where people start to lose their attention span. They might be tempted to pick up their phone and read a text message, that kind of thing. And in this case, the Mercedes-Benz will make sure that the car is still safe, even if you're a little bit distracted.
Yeah, I feel like it's not self-driving as much as it is, even in bad behavior, and I'm not advocating this, it's definitely going to be collision likelihood reducing.
Absolutely.
You know?
Which is really what the name of the game is now as we're moving forward. We've got so many great integrated safety technologies, whether it be, seat belts and airbags and crumple zones and high tensile strength steel and all that stuff that's really done a great job to make the cars, I don't want to say as safe as they can be, but pretty darn close to as safe as they can be. Now it's about avoiding accidents, so preventative braking measures, autonomous functionality, keeping the car from going off the road, and ultimately keeping you from hitting something that's big and heavy and stopped.
And that's going to stop, yes. So there's the moment of impact protection. We've done a lot with that. There's avoiding that impact ever.
Right.
That's where we're going to see such huge gains.
Absolutely.
Huge. You were delighted by some BMW engineering, staying in Germany for a moment.
I delighted might be a little strong. I was certainly very intrigued by the new BMW M2. So the 135M was an exciting car that was out a couple of years ago. Pretty limited production, little tiny coupe with basically M3 got stuck in there. Great little fun pocket rocket that ultimately was only produced for a very limited amount of time, and is now a very coveted car. but it may not be a very coveted car for long because BMW is now releasing the M2, which is a full-on M version from their 2 Series car.
Now, this is a real M, not
Right.
not an M trim package.
Right, exactly. We see a lot of M trim packages. For example, they had a trim on their X4, an M package on there, which they launched here at the show.
Yeah.
But this is a proper M car. We have aluminum suspension on there, lightweight hollow roll bars, for example. Basically, a lot of the suspension bits from the M3, M4 have been ported over here.
Yeah.
Twin turbo inline 6 motor. I'm not blanking on the horsepower figures, but I believe 0 to 60 in about 4.4 seconds, if I remember correctly, which is pretty great. So it's going to be, there we go, 365 horsepower. And it's got a burnout and drift mode, so you can hit a button on the dashboard. It'll let you do a big smoky burnout if you really hate your tires, or you can go out and try to be Ken Block in the thing. So I think fully optioned out, it comes out in the, I believe, around the 60K range, which is still undercutting the base M3 cost. So you can get a fully kitted out M2 for less than an M3, which is going to be pretty appealing to a lot of people.
And as they pointed out here, as we were talking to Mr. Willish, who's the head of BMW in North America, M cars, this is their #1 market, US. And we asked him about that. Is it just because our market is so large? And he said, no, it's because there's also a deeper passion for the M cars here, relatively, than in other markets. He talked about how the BMW owners groups are so large and so enthusiastic.
And he was
here.
talking about that he went to Bimmerfest, which kind of blew my mind. Bimmerfest is a definite, a big enthusiast group for BMW owners here in the US.
That's the pinnacle for Beamer lovers, right?
And he goes there, which surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, so they're keeping the cycle alive.
That's great, which
not
you have
being
to do.
standoffish, but you in the U.S., you love your M cars, clearly, and it's no reason that they make sure they bring them here to Detroit for a lot of their debuts. Interesting sidebar story. Before we go to a break here, this is a completely different kind of car company. It's right next door to us here at Detroit, called VLF. It was called VL Automotive until a few weeks ago when they added the F, which is Fisker, Henrik Fisker, who you know from the erstwhile Fisker Karma, which is a plug-in hybrid luxury car. Here he rolled out a new car called the Force 10. That is
Force 1 V10.
Force 1 V10.
Right.
I keep getting that wrong. This is a car that is being built on a Viper platform with a new adaptive suspension from one of their partners who is a major Viper broker and racer. A carbon fiber body specially made and designed by Fisker and put together inside this company VLF that was already taking leftover Fisker Karmas and power training them with Corvette powertrains.
You missed the most important part of that car, the dual champagne bottle holder.
Right. And he was kind of serious about it.
We brought that up. We interviewed Mr. Fisker a little earlier. We were joking about the champagne bottle thing, but he was dead serious about
Yeah,
the
I
fact
thought he was
that
going
you
to say,
need
oh yeah, we put that in for the show, it's kind of goofy. And he said, no, you need to have your champagne secured.
Right. Because you know how when you're driving to an event and the champagne bottle's rolling around the floor, oh, yes, Mr. Fisker, we know absolutely all about that situation. And I like how it's 2 bottles, so you can not only have a bottle of champagne for the party, but a bottle for the after party as well, which is great. But definitely one of those high-end boutique luxury exotic sports cars that will sell in very, very few numbers, if indeed they sell any numbers at all. But an interesting looking machine.
And it was a little taste of the Geneva Auto Show, which if you've seen our coverage from that, which I'm sure you have for the last number of years, there's a lot of boutique makers in the European market. They show up at Geneva and they take a lot of cars and they rework them heavily. They take an exotic and they rework it. That's the only thing here at this show floor where you see that. This is very much all about mainstream makers with big selling products. And then there's this one boutique call out here that I think he got lost, took a right at Geneva and ended up over here.
I got to say, though, I like that about the American Auto Show here, the North American International Auto Show, excuse me, that we're talking about cars that generally have a production track. Even when we see a concept car debut here, usually we see a production version of that a year later or a couple of years later, or something that looks a lot like it. You know, it's great to go out and dream. It's great to look at all these beautiful design sketches and concepts and beautiful things like that with suicide doors and no handles and no mirrors and all those wonderful things that we love. But ultimately, it's great to come here and see cars that are going to be hitting the market in the near future, and that will be ultimately impacting the industry.
Let's talk about, this is a total top-end announcement, but who doesn't love a new generation of the Porsche 911 Turbo?
Right, so we've seen the new 911, the 991.2 with turbo. Now we've seen the new 911, 991.2 capital T Turbo, which is a distinctive model, much higher horsepower, 580 horsepower in the S trim. I think it's 540 in the non-S trim. And when you're getting into that kind of category, I don't even know that 40 horsepower really makes a difference. But ultimately, you're talking 0 to 60 seconds in less than 3 0 to 60 in less than 3 seconds.
Less than 3 seconds. And Alex Goy, one of our colleagues at Roadshow, was up here talking earlier in the day and said, look how close that car is coming to Veyron territory.
Absolutely, in a
For-
car that will probably cost $150,000 to $200,000.
Oh, it's in the realm of
like
sales
that.
tax on a Veyron.
Yeah.
It's not too
Yes.
far from that.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
amazing.
Right, if you curb a wheel in a Veyron, you could just go buy a new Porsche
Right, buy a new 911 Turbo to
probably.
make up for it.
It is pretty amazing, and that is also a car that you can drive relatively inconspicuously. Porsches are relatively common. You drive a Veyron by, not only are they going to hear those quad turbos from a mile away, you're going to be turning heads like mad, but you can drive a turbo into town and not really
And that was
cause
one of
many
the
eyeballs
interesting
to
themes
raise.
that they made here when we had one of Porsche's execs here to talk about it. They really keep hitting that everyday usage theme.
Right.
Not the most spacious of their models. Others are, like a Cayenne, but they even hammer the 911 as an everyday car, which explains
Absolutely.
a lot of the creature comforts they've been adding, because we were needling him on how they'll go into additional driver assist, and does
Right.
that spoil the 911 message? And they said no.
And one of those things is adaptive suspension, which they've made standard on every new 911 going forward. And it really does work. If you go in the comfort mode, it's a very, very comfortable, pliant, plush car. You know, still fun to drive, but ultimately, if you're cruising down a broken up concrete highway, it'll be not very punishing. But you turn up to sport mode, and suddenly you've got your race car back, very, very sharp, and you can tune the throttle response, the steering feel, everything else too, to make it as comfortable a car as you want, or as hardcore a car as you want. It's great for that, and you've got lots of room in there for little kids or bags of groceries or dogs or whatever else you like.
Let's talk briefly about another Porsche angle. Let's clarify for our audience, not total breaking news, but a recent trend of how they're going to restack Boxster and Cayman,
Right.
where they sit in the line and what they're based on.
So they are both cars that are set as distinctive names right now, but ultimately they're based on the same frame. So going forward, they're going to be the 718 is going to be the name. So we're going to have the 718 Boxster and then the 718 Cayman. One model, two names. I don't know
So
that really
within
gonna
the
make a
Porsche
difference.
hierarchy, they're both the same model as 718,
Right.
and they're expressed in different body styles.
Much like you have the 911 Cabriolet versus the 911 Carrera, same basic
Okay,
idea.
yep.
So ultimately, I don't know that it really makes a difference to most people. It's going to streamline things a little bit in terms of their reporting, in terms of sales and that kind of thing. It'll make that car look a little bit more successful perhaps than it has in the past, because now everything's being brought
Because
together.
the two, a Boxster had X number of sales, and it basically got cleaved in half when Cayman arrived.
Right.
Which makes them both look like they're selling tepidly. But to
Right.
Porsche, that's one product in many
Right.
ways. And they're also going to move the Boxster a little more upscale. A lot of people think of the Boxster as being your entry-level Porsche.
Right.
They're going to push that up, and they're going to position the Cayman as definitely your entry-level, which, to the delight of autocrossers, it's like, great, let's not bring it up.
Yes,
Let's keep it as
don't add any
affordable.
more accessories that we need. Don't
Yep.
add any more leather. Don't add any more stuff that we don't want. Just make it a nice, clean little sports car, which I think is great. I mean, Cayman lovers, they love it for its simplicity, for its lightweight,
Yeah.
for the basic nature of the car. And turbochargers are coming. They're bringing turbocharged 4 in there, so that's going to make some people a little bit nervous. But I think this will definitely help to purify the Cayman a little bit, despite the fact that they're actually lumping them together.
There'll be some interesting runs, I think, on the last few models of the non-turbo Porsche sports cars as they run to the end, just like there was with air-cooled. And who knows if there's going to be a future bubble, like we've seen with so many air-cooled Porsches. Maybe one day down the road, non-turbo standard Porsches will be the next speculative bubble.
That could be.
They
Investors,
could be feeding that.
maybe you should get your checkbooks
You heard
out.
it here first. Okay, another weird favorite of mine. You tweeted this. It was so odd. I used the phrase, hot minivan. What's wrong with me?
First time ever.
I don't even have kids. It doesn't make any sense, but it's a good-looking vehicle. Chrysler's new Pacifica minivan, replacing the stodgy sounding and stodgy looking Town and Country. I mean, just think about that name.
Town and Country. That definitely harkens back to a different era of motoring.
That's
I'll
from
put
an
it
old
that
Bing
way.
Crosby movie or something. A musical.
Right.
This new Pacifica is got a very interesting powertrain split. Get a V6, which you might expect. Get a plug-in hybrid in there as well,
Right.
which speaks to family economy.
This is not only the first plug-in hybrid minivan, but the first hybrid minivan that we've seen at all. 30 miles of range when you plug it in and go fully charged. 80 mpge out of the thing is an estimate. They haven't given us the full EPA rating just yet, so we'll see where that comes in. But that could be, 30 miles for most people. That's enough to get to school and back for the kids. And you plug it in again when you get home and you get a fully charged car. You maybe never burn any gas at all during the week, only on longer weekend trips would you ever need to fire up the gas engine. Pretty interesting.
I think minivans tend to live a two-part day. There's the morning runs, the evening and afternoon runs. In the middle, it may be sitting there waiting to charge up. So they have a pretty credible argument here.
I think so.
Because one of the few vehicle types that tends to come home in the middle of the day
Right.
versus going to work where you may not have charging.
Right.
Very interesting.
And the way that they package the batteries is interesting too. They of course brought the stow-and-go seating, which basically allows the seats to fold down into the floor.
Yeah.
Instead of that, in this case, they took those cavities beneath the middle seats and put battery packs in there. So you do lose stow-and-go seating, which is a bit of a bummer, but you don't don't have any intrusion into the cabin. You don't have any humps or bumps or anywhere in there with battery packs. Pretty nice, pretty clean.
It's a smart way to go. A couple of fun things. They've added a foot wagger so you can come alongside it, wag your foot, and the side doors will open like a lot of hatches do on some cars. They've got a children's interface in the rear screens so they can see a cartoony version of the nav map and see progress, which is giving them a classic, immediate, gooey answer to when do we get there? Are we there yet? They've also got this very interesting, they've got a vacuum in the back. Just like Honda Odyssey had a corner on.
There
for
goes your
quite a while.
class-leading exclusive there.
There goes your
Honda,
exclusive. And they also have perpendicular and parallel self-park, not out of the vehicle, which is the more advanced type, but inside it'll handle the tricky steering, which with a big vehicle like that, that's worthwhile.
Absolutely.
You know.
So yeah, definitely one of the more talked about cars. You know, it's an interesting move to take an older nameplate that really wasn't loved by any means, and to take that and apply it to a category that most people don't love either, but to bring them together into a package that honestly is quite nice.
And as you see the lines, they really have done a lot of things sculpting it so it doesn't have that refrigerator tipped on its side look. It actually has some nice sculpting that it's going to be eye-catching. You may not everyone love it, but you definitely look at it and say, okay, there's some style in that minivan versus just a big cubic space.
Something you can't always say.
Yeah. Now, I want to wrap up with one of the most interesting cars that didn't debut here, didn't get fleshed out here. It got fleshed out at CES last week, but then continued to resonate here, the Bolt.
That was the Chevy Bolt, B-O-L-T, not V-O-L-T, which is what we have to say every single time, which is going to get really annoying.
I'll never understand that, but
Absolutely.
that's where they went.
This is Chevy's low-cost, relatively high mile range EV, so $30,000-ish. They used to say below $30,000. Now they're saying around $30,000 for the cost of the vehicle.
After credit.
After credit, so you got to expect it's going to be $37,500 because there's a $7,500 federal tax rebate. But some states have additional rebates as well, so you could actually get this for maybe $28,000 or even less, depending on where you live. But for that cost, you'll get a car that will go 200 miles on a charge, which is pretty impressive. You know, most of the EVs that you see have an 80 to 100 mile range, and most of them cost about this much. Some of them cost even more. i3s, things like that, are more expensive.
So it's like you're getting a free 100-plus miles of range in the same price category.
Which really changes the game for a lot of people. 100 miles, I've driven the Mitsubishi IMEV, I've driven a lot of these other low-cost cars, and you very quickly get range anxiety when you see the mileage ticking down under 50 miles. You know, that's into unexpected detour territory right there. That's when you get into trouble.
Under 50 is the same pain point I have. Once I get about 50 or 40-something miles, I start to get nervous about, okay, plus if I encounter a lot of hills, all of a sudden I'm in territory.
Right, or I'm stuck on the highway and need to make a detour and I don't know where I'm going. So going up to 200 miles makes that a lot easier. Plus, here at the show in Detroit, they announced that it will have fast DC charging. So you'll be able to get 90 miles of range in 30 minutes, which is pretty solid. So you can imagine pulling off at a rest stop, getting a coffee, going to the bathroom, maybe grabbing a burger, come back to your car, you got 90 miles of range, you can drive for another hour and a half-ish. Again, it's great to see that low cost being brought into the car, but they've also using this as a platform for a lot of new technology. They're building in Bluetooth Low Energy, which is basically a new quick way, almost like an NFC version. So a quick low power wireless connectivity, which you can use to connect to your phone. Even before you get in the car, as you're approaching the car, it will connect to your phone and identify who you are. So your settings will be based on your phone's identity effectively. So the car will unlock, you get in the car, and it will rearrange everything based to where you left it. Not only things like seat, but also color, what song you were listening to, and you can customize the interface, much like an Android home screen. You can drag widgets around and drop them and put them where you want to.
Very tablet-like,
up. Pretty neat. And they're going to be debuting that on the Bolt again at the end of this year. So it's an interesting idea of bringing personalization to a lower cost car. Again, $30,000 is pretty attainable these days.
Great usable space inside because they flatten that battery out. It's a big partnership they have with LG, where the LG's making the battery, I think the inverter, the motor, the control electronics.
Everything but the chassis and the seats, pretty much.
Yeah,
and
so
the tires, I suppose, too.
And that's a partnership they've had for a few years. It's
Absolutely.
now starting to really bear fruit between LG Chem, and General Motors.
Right, and that flat platform, much like the Tesla Model S, allows them to have decent handling in the car. Maybe not quite as good as the i3 that I've driven as well, but pretty good handling. And also gives them a really nice flat platform that they can then build upon. So you get a flat floor, a lot of good cargo space, the seats fold down flat nicely. It's a really nice practical car, and frankly, it's a kind of a boring looking car, I'll be honest with you. But not everybody wants to drive an EV that says, hey, I'm an EV, I'm electric powered. It's just a normal looking car.
Exactly, and everybody wants a statement car. I think we're at the point now in the EV era when we're starting to attract a broad enough audience that there are folks who say, yeah, I want one, I don't want to say I'm evangelizing.
Exactly.
Now, alongside all this technology, they also rolled out a very expected but welcome derivation of their Chevy sister platform, of the GM overall strategy.
Right.
Android Auto, CarPlay, 4G LTE to power in-car services and to create a really meaningful Wi-Fi hotspot.
Right, so we're seeing that now across the range, and basically any car that's in the MyLink family is going to get Android Auto and CarPlay going forward, and that extends across the entire GM family. So here at the show, we've seen the GMC, the Acadia, for example, from GMC is going to be getting Android Auto and CarPlay.
Yeah.
So, you know, utilitarian cars and trucks, little inexpensive cars, and even premium cars will be getting Android Auto and CarPlay, which for a consumer, that's great because you don't have to think about choosing a car based on whether or not you have an iPhone or an Android device, which really would have been an unfortunate situation if we'd gone that way.
Yeah.
We're seeing most manufacturers say that they're going to choose both, and I think that's great news.
All right, so from a burly, strong-arm Acadia all the way to a compact, light, small footprint Bolt, you know, and the Chevy Malibu in the middle. I mean, GM is really pushing, I think, the most credibly Android Auto and CarPlay of any car maker at scale.
It's great to see because, again, we were a little worried that we were going to be splitting the industry based on one or the other, and with everybody jumping on board with both, that's great news for consumers.
Yeah, encouraging to see. So that's a snapshot. There's so much more, of course, coming out of this show, but we thought those were probably the handful of the most important news headlines coming out of the show here in Detroit. Find all our coverage at theroadshow.com. That's, of course, the home of our news site, CNET's Roadshow. I'm Brian Cooley, Tim Stevens, back with you next week with the latest news about high-tech cars, high-performance cars, and modern driving right here at AutoComplete.